All right, well, it is great to be back, as I said earlier, and I want to, before we go any further, I want to say a couple of very special thank yous. First of all, thank you to Sarah Carter for her leadership with our band and sort of being the band leader in Andrew's absence while we were gone. That was wonderful. I know everything went just really great, so Sarah, thank you so much for all that extra effort. Also want to say a special thank you to Paul Farrarone. Paul, thank you for preaching the past 2 Sundays, 2 wonderful sermons, and grateful for your pastoral leadership too and for sharing the word. Great to be back. My sleep schedule, as Stephen said, we're getting there. Stomach schedule is even more complicated for me. It's weird to have your stomach be on an 8-hour different schedule than you are on, but it was a wonderful trip, great experience, and I figured out early on in my college years, when I was able to take my first trip abroad, I felt like there was something very significant that happened. Yes, I enjoyed visiting new places, being exposed to new ideas, new things, but there was something very exciting to me about being taken outside of my familiar turf, my familiar customs and culture, and being put into a place that was so wildly different that there was no mistaking that I wasn't at home anymore. And I realized that what I really liked about that was it was a way to sort of dabble in my anxieties or my fears about being taken outside of my comfort zone and exploring what it would be like to just sort of push the edges of that. And the more that I have done that, the more I feel competent and good about that kind of thing. And now it's caused me to want to push further in my travels. And I just have really enjoyed that very much. And as anybody who knows will tell you too, there is a way of shrinking the world at the same time as making the world larger when you do these kinds of travels. Yes, the world, you realize that being in one little zip code and one little place in one little state that feels so big at home feels so very tiny when you're far away. I mean, most of the folks on this trip were dropped into Cairo on an airplane and probably had never been in a city of 25 million people before. And there is nothing to make you feel small like being in a city of 25 million where you don't know anyone and you don't speak the language. That has a way of making you feel very small. But also, how much similarity we have with other people around the world. They want the same things. They're living life as best they can, trying to care for their families, trying to make a home and a life for themselves, worshiping, living, going through life just as we do. And there are some things that sort of break down the largeness or the vastness of the human experience too when we get into those situations. So while it was very unnerving at times to be in a place that was so unfamiliar, there was also things that were, like I said, very much commonplace. I did feel true fear one time on this trip, and probably not from what you are expecting, I will say. There was a free afternoon that we had, and Eleanor, my wife, and I chose to go and visit a museum that wasn't on the itinerary. So we went to the museum, and then we took a cab back. And we were getting back just before dinner time, and so rush hour traffic was in full swing, and people were cruising down the freeways, and this is on the outskirts of Giza. And our cab driver had the address and was taking us back to the hotel, and I noticed that we blew right past the hotel on the freeway. He realized it and pulled a U-turn. Not across the median and back that way, but as in onto the right shoulder. And so we drove the wrong way on the freeway back to the exit that we missed, going back to our hotel. And as he made that turn, and as I'm watching these cars coming at us, and by the way, they don't even have lanes on their freeways there, so it's just kind of like this. And I just see cars coming at us like this, right? And we're going down, and at that very moment, his radio piped up, and the afternoon Muslim call to prayer came on the radio. And he began muttering quietly under his breath along with the same prayers, and I thought, that's fitting, because I too am in an attitude of prayer as we are in these lanes with this oncoming traffic. And so he prayed to Allah, I prayed to Jesus, and we got back to the hotel safely. That was my white knuckle moment of the trip. But again, we made the world a little bit smaller for us both that day. We had the same goal, getting to the destination safely. It's interesting though, coming back home, I felt like with each day that we got closer to the end of the trip, my anxiety and some of my fears ramped up. And it had nothing to do with being where we were, traveling, or having flights home. It had everything to do with what we were coming back to. Let me tell you, I think we could all use 2 weeks removal from the American media market right now. Because I could feel it palpably, the tension rising as people were getting the sense that we're going back home and we're going back into the final throes of the election season and all the things that we're going to be bombarded with. And there is a tension, there is a weight that we are carrying. It doesn't matter who your preferred candidate is or whether you're an independent or whatever. We are all feeling it. We're all feeling that tenseness, and we are just shorter with each other, and we have short fuses. It's rough, and I would say, and I would ask the other pilgrims too, if they had felt that too. But there's something about being home that is lovely, and there's something that was really nice to be away from for a while. And you know, I've been talking to people and listening to other people and listening to radio programs and reading editorials and hearing other people's comments about this, and it feels like everybody is in this same place right now. So we talked about the election, and we talked about how we conduct ourselves as Christian people a few months ago in a lead up to this time of year, but here it is upon us, and I think it's worth addressing again today. I was reading an article by one of my favorite Christian writers, and I've mentioned her, quoted her several times before. Her name is Diana Butler Bass. And she did a blog in the summer, in July of 22. And she was talking about all of this tension and this anxiety that she's been feeling. And she's been talking about this again. And wherever she goes on these road tours and speaking at different churches and community centers, she's finding that people are saying, I'm anxious, I'm fearful, I'm carrying a heavy burden on my shoulders. It just doesn't feel like I feel settled. I never quite get good rest. You know, that kind of thing that we all can identify with. And she referred back to this blog post that she wrote in 2022. And here's what she said. This is from July of 2022. Speaking of this anxiety and this tension, she says, yesterday's news was filled with an array of really bad stories. Fires threatening California's oldest trees, a horrible video of the Uvalde school shooting, fallout from an abortion ruling, high gas and food prices, a black man's body riddled with bullets, January 6 hearings, climate change, gun violence, the rights of women, inflation, adding to economic inequality, racial violence, the crisis of democracy, all in a single day of America. So we've been carrying this burden for a while. But the point of it was to not just, again, to highlight the challenges of the times that we are living in, but what is the faithful response to this? How are we as Christian people supposed to address this, to live out our lives? What is the faithful response to living in this anxiety and fear-laden existence that we are experiencing right now? And her response was this: wonder. Wonder is the antidote to fear. Because she said, while all of those things and current events took place on one day in the summer of July 2022, that same week, NASA released the first images from the James Webb Telescope that had been sent into the far reaches of the galaxy. Check out some of these images. These are images that came back from that telescope. These are pictures that have never been seen before because this telescope was able to photograph with ultraviolet imagery things that we have never seen before. Stars being born, constellations coming into existence, the cycle of life ending and being recreated and regenerated again. Things that the mind can hardly even fathom from places so distant that the numbers are mind-boggling to us. And it's hard to look upon images like this and not be filled with wonder. And I guess I would tend to agree with her that there is something about this kind of image that reminds us that what we are experiencing right now is just the pinpoint of one snapshot in a much greater story. Now, not to downplay the tensions that we are experiencing, not to say that our lives don't matter in the grand cosmic scheme of things. Of course they do. Our scriptures talk about God knowing us and loving us so intimately that every hair upon our head is known. So of course God cares for us, but there is something humbling and recalibrating about thinking on a much grander, galactic kind of scale. The passage that Stephen read from Job comes at the end of the story of Job. You may remember in Job, it's a drama, right in the middle of the Old Testament, a drama where a story of a man named Job who has basically everything precious from him taken away through death and tragedy and illness, disasters. And Job is left asking big questions about his existence, about God's role in the world. And then we have this response from God that, depending on how you read it, can sound a little snarky. But just to recap for you, God basically says, hey, you got all these big questions? You think that your problems are so great? You've got all these things that are troubling you, but let me ask you. Consider for a moment the much bigger picture. Where were you when the foundations of the earth were laid? How do you make sense of things as grand as all of creation? Or as Amanda was talking about, when you look up to the stars of the night sky or the sand on the beach, does it not make you feel a little bit smaller? Doesn't it put your challenges into perspective just a little bit? Isn't getting off the jetway and finding yourself in a city of 25 million just a little bit humbling? Of course it is. Of course it is. These kinds of things matter. This is God saying, Job, I think we need to recalibrate a little bit. And it's not that I'm not there for you. And it's not that I don't hear your concerns. And it's not that I don't love you. But just consider, this is one piece of a much larger story. And in the way that Job unfolds, things get good again. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Even if Job can't see it, it will get better. It doesn't mean that what has happened is forgotten, but it means that things are getting better. There's something, I think, helpful about that, and a faithful response for us who are struggling right now, who are living in times of anxiety, stress, fear. And sometimes we put an awful lot of emphasis on something like an election. Not saying that it's not important. I believe it's very important. But those kinds of images, they're a recentering. They're a recalibrating for us. They cause us to take a deep breath, to take in all that is, all that was, and imagine what could be. And they help us center ourselves. So I'm hoping that as I continue to live in the stress and the tension of the next few weeks, and in all likelihood beyond, I want to remember and focus again on the thousands of faces that I saw out the bus window, than I encountered on the sidewalks and the city streets of faraway lands. I want to remember the smiles of children. I want to see in my mind's eye men and women going to work and living their lives, and remembering that my piece is just a very small part of the global picture. I want to think back on things like ancient tombs, hieroglyphics, and pyramids. I want to think about gigantic houses of worship, beautifully decorated, that have changed hands in different traditions and been used for different purposes over the year. And I want to remember the awe of that and help those things put my life into perspective again. I want to take some time to stare out at the night sky and wonder, and maybe a bit of reverent terror, of the cosmos beyond, and think of how vast it is, and about how God's handiwork is in place in all of these things, even though I might not fully be able to grasp it or understand it or manipulate it. But I want to appreciate that with awe and reverence. And when I feel fear, I want to fight back with wonder. I want to look at all that God has made and God's ongoing story and involvement in human creation. I want it to recalibrate my life, to put things in perspective. And I hope that you will be able to do some of the same, and that together, as a family of faith, we might lean on one another, we might be stronger from this experience together, and that we might put our trust and awe in the wonder of God. I want to close with a psalm, and we're going to do this together. We're going to read this together as our second scripture of the morning. It's going to be a call and response psalm. So Jay, if you put that up now, and I invite you to read the bold. Psalm 104. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You stretch out the heavens like a tent. You set the beams of your chambers on the waters. You make the clouds your chariot. You ride on the wings of the wind. You make the winds your messengers. Fire and flame your ministers. You set the earth on its foundations so that it shall never be shaken. You cover it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they flee. At the sound of your thunder, they take to flight. They rose up to the mountains, ran down to the valleys, to the place that you appointed for them. Set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Let us pray.